The whole crowd is waiting for the address of our Honorable External Affairs Minister. May I now request Sir to kindly address the gathering. Thank you.
Namaskar. Vice Chancellor Professor Yogesh Singh Ji, Vice Chancellor Delhi University, Vice Chancellor JNU, distinguished academic personalities on the dais, equally distinguished academics sitting across, teachers, students, faculty, friends. It's really a very, very great pleasure for me to come back to this university, which I first came 52 years ago. So there is always a sense of nostalgia, also a sense of how time has passed. There are a lot of memories as you sit and listen to people's, but overall, I must say it's a very, very good feeling, and thank you for bringing me back. There are three very, I would say, unusual aspects of the event today. The first one is that books are written about prime ministers. That's not unusual. Sometimes you have ministers writing in books, whole books, chapters of books. That's also not unusual. But to have a book about a sitting prime minister, where a sitting home minister and a sitting foreign minister and a sitting NSA have written, that is unusual. So that's my first point for your consideration today. The second is actually the subject of the book. Again, it's in political biographies or in comments or in analysis, you have people whose records are dissected, whose performance has been examined. But this is a very unusual case of someone who has continuously been in government 20 years and is still going strong. And therefore, the very subject of a leader who's been 13 years in the state and now 8 years at the center, the linkages between the state and the center, and the fact that it's been really an entire generation of leadership. That is the second, to my mind, unusual point. The third, of course, of the book, which you would see out there, but I have a copy here with me, is a large part of it is actually written. My share is 15 pages, but I assure you I wrote it myself. There was no draft. It came from my heart. Anybody who reads it will discover that. But a large part of the book is actually written by people from outside the government. And I feel that is correct because in many ways we are discussing someone who surely is the prime minister, who has been the chief minister, but who in many ways has captured the sentiment and the aspirations of the entire country. So it's very inadequate to see him as a government figure alone, and therefore I'm very, very pleased that a lot of other people who have approached him from the perspective of sports or academics or business or public life have had an opportunity to share the views. Now, what I would like to do is, uh, when you are associated with the book, it seems strange to give a speech about something you've already written. So I would like to read out for you some very select segments, and I want to do that not with my own chapter, but actually starting with the chapter written by Home Minister Amit Shah. So I want to take you through these. I do Amit Shah, then I'd like to do Ajit Doval, and then I'll come to my own segment. So the first, the beginning I would like to really give you in a way is what makes a leader. And I'm now reading from the book. How does one define a national leader? In India, before Modi, this question engrossed and puzzled many serious students of politics and society. In the immediate aftermath of 1947, national leaders were identified recall, by the name recall across regions and states because of their participation in the freedom struggle. In the succeeding decades, however, notably at the height of the coalition era, the expression national leader came to be much abused. It was a status generously distributed by the Delhi media to its friends and favorites. The label was handed out even to politicians of no proven merit and only capable of winning a Lok Sabha seat from one or two safe seats. They were very visible in news television studios, but unknown in villages merely 25 kilometers away from Parliament House. After Modi and after 2014, such facile and insincere manufacturing of national leaders was shown up for what it was. Narendra Modi is now the template for what it means and what it takes to be a national leader. So that is my first thought from the book. Let me give you a second. The second actually relates to coalitions and the cost which this country has paid for political coalitions. So it is both a governance point I'm making and a political point that I'm making. And I again quote from Amit Bhai's writings here. For 25 years, between 1989 and 2014, India has been governed by coalitions. Coalitions, by their very nature, are a compromise. They are a compromise of political interests and a compromise of political outcomes. Fatalism has set in among ordinary citizens. They too had to compromise with their aspirations, whether for themselves and their families or for India and its dreams. There was a feeling that policy paralysis, administrative confusion, quarreling ministers, blackmailing allies, corruption, insecurity, vulnerability to terrorism, and weak and indecisive prime ministers who acted more as managers than leaders were built into the coalition system. These had become a permanent curse on Indian democracy. A low level equilibrium of expectations had set in. India had taught itself not to think big and not to think ambitious. So I flagged that for you as actually a situation which many of us would recall was, in a sense, the state of the country. And then I come to a third quote from Home Minister again. And this refers to Prime Minister Modi's record as Chief Minister in Gujarat. Amit Bhai writes that many of his programs in Gujarat, the bringing up of Narmada's waters from South Gujarat to Saurashtra, for instance, were conceptualized with a long view. The gestation period ran into more than one electoral cycle because Modi worked for not just the next election, but the Gujarat of the next decade and the next generation. Expectedly, the BJP too became the political vehicle of Gujarat's development and aspirations for the next decade and the next generation. So the 3 points which I have made to you really is of leadership, it is of the long view, it is of the benefits of overcoming a coalition kind rule of the country. And the results of that I sum up in my fourth quote from this chapter. Modi pe bharosa is an abiding principle, whether during an economic churning, a natural disaster, a pandemic, a terrorist attack, or a threat at the border. For hundreds of millions of Indians, Narendra Modi is the family patriarch, the sagacious uncle, the dependable older brother. He is the national statesman, and in him are invested India's hopes and aspirations, and its people's incredible expectations. If any Indian is in trouble anywhere in the world, there is a calming sense that Narendra Modi will stand by me, that his absolute attention is only a tweet away. There is a confidence that Modi will do his utmost and he will stretch every sinew, squeeze every minute, and give it his all. He is much more than the Prime Minister. In the popular imagination, he is India's sentinel. So these are actually thoughts which someone who's been so close to the Prime Minister has expressed in this book. And I'll then switch gears and give you a second set of insights. And this is actually from the National Security Advisor, who's again been working very, very closely. And this is, I selected two passages which are different from what the Home Minister has spoken about. These are much more about how the government works, what does it do, a sense of the governance, a feel for it, if you would. So here is Mr. Doval's first quote. One of the important tasks of Prime Minister Modi has been to create a national vision of security and change the deeply ingrained status quo mindset and archaic attitudes that resist all change. The key challenges include finding the right balance to leverage soft and hard power, pursuing national interest in a polarized global environment, and execute outcome-driven security policies. Branding India's image globally was also important to make the country a destination of choice for investments and strategic partnerships. Prime Minister Modi's approach has involved consultation with stakeholders, reliance on expert advice, a penchant for going into details, and awareness of the peculiarities of the organizational cultures of institutions dealing with national security. This has led to strategic clarity and speedy decision making. The fact that PM Modi was not hemmed in by the baggage of serving in the central government brought in fresh perspectives. Now, that's the overall sense which Mr. Doval gives, but he then gives an example. And the example actually relates to the border infrastructure in our northern borders facing China. Mr. Doval writes, Prime Minister Modi excels not only in original thinking, but also in the diligent planning of the minutest detail to ensure their execution. He believes that the devil lies in the detail, not only in planning, but also in its execution. In May 2015, he was given a detailed briefing about the state of the infrastructure along our northern borders, the gross inadequacy of roads, tunnels, and other facilities requiring immediate attention. He was also informed about the massive strides made by the Chinese in infrastructure development on their side. He was quick to grasp the strategic import of this deficiency and thereafter followed it up with a doggedness that no other prime minister could have demonstrated, would have demonstrated. Additional funds were sanctioned through his personal intervention with the finance minister. He also went into the smallest detail, including of a highly technical nature, to understand the problems and complexities, particularly in the construction of tunnels. Today, in international relations. Over the next few years, the world was to discover that he was, in fact, a leader who had developed his own policy insights and ideas over many years. Not just that, he also had his unique way of messaging, implementation, and follow up. So, this was for us, at least those of us who had not met him before, I had, uh, a kind of introduction to Narendra Modi on the foreign policy side. Now, I then proceed to describe to you, and this will be very familiar in a university. This is almost like sitting for an exam. Okay? Every time you go to meet the Prime Minister, engage him in a conversation, it is like you prepare well. You don't go in there without having done your homework and be very clear about what you are saying. I think Vice Chancellor mentioned he was very data point driven, so a very empirical person in a way. And this is how I describe it. It is worth reflecting on the habits and worldview of a prime minister who has put such a strong personal imprint on foreign policy. Along with his legendary energy level, what is striking about Narendra Modi is his enormous curiosity about the world. His zest to absorb and process information is matched only by an ability to deploy it effectively. For us, it may be a data point. For him, it is a way of connecting and influencing. This may be the innate trait of a politician, but he has taken it to an altogether different level. The goal is obviously to arrive at the best possible understanding of what awaits him and to shape it to advantage. It could be the intricacies of American politics before meeting President Obama, Chinese history as he was going into Xi'an, or perhaps the post-Soviet era to get a good feel of President Putin. He would not only soak in what was being explained, but constantly push to do better. The interest may pertain to happenings, subjects, and domains. It could easily be about people and their interplay. There's also a sense of self-discipline in this exercise. He wants to be clear about the red lines before engaging. For the Prime Minister himself, sources of information are broad and diverse, ranging from the spoken and written word to the officialdom, political world, media, or networking. The idea is to get into the mind of the other party. Interacting with him at that time as Foreign Secretary, I noted that he was never hesitant to ask and always patient in listening. What has now become a standard operating procedure for the Delhi bureaucracy was initially a novel experience for all of us. Anyone engaging with him at any level had to prepare thoroughly to hold their own. So, in that sense, I present to you obviously a picture of a leader, very grounded, very natural politician, very deeply into what his people feel, but also very giving a lot of attention to governance, to reform, to change, who's very who's very, in a sense, almost humble, very open-minded about the way he briefs himself, about how he prepares for dealing with the world. And I would like to share one more paragraph, maybe two more paragraphs. One is actually my first encounter with him. This was in 2011. I was ambassador in China. And, again, the reason I picked this paragraph, it was my intention initially, but I listened to the Vice Chancellor, and the Vice Chancellor spoke about how Modi lived for Gujarat. And I want you to reflect on this nuance which I'm going to give you. Okay. Among the Prime Minister's many attributes, one that stands out is his deep sense of nationalism. This is, of course, intrinsic to his political beliefs and one very much in evidence even when he was chief minister. When I first met him as ambassador in China in 2011, unlike many other chief ministers, he specifically sought a political briefing. I recall his emphasizing that on issues of terrorism and sovereignty, we needed to make sure that we spoke with one voice abroad, especially in China. This, incidentally, was also my first exposure to his method of working. Among his takeaways was his insistence that I should not hesitate to indicate clearly what he should say and equally what he should not say. His letter on return to India went beyond the normal appreciations that visitors expend to hospitality, etc. What was different was a very pointed mention. I still have the letter, by the way, it is one of my prized memories. What was different was a pointed mention of my successfully upholding the interests of our country in China. As Prime Minister, it was only to be expected that he would be confronted with national security challenges on a recurring basis and on occasion as a crisis. When it comes to terrorism, especially of a cross border nature, he has been crystal clear that he would never allow it to be normalized. This determination has shaped our Pakistan policy since 2014. And lastly, I would, in a sense, give you, it's been 8 years now working with the Prime Minister, so all of you see him from the country, in a sense, because I travel with him, I look at, I'm with him on a lot of occasions abroad. How does the world see him? And that's also something I felt perhaps I should spell out. And I put it to you this way: there is no gainsaying the fact that Prime Minister Modi looms large on the world stage. Definitely, his policies and initiatives have had their impact. But there is also a personal respect that influences the attitude of others. Peers perceive him as quintessentially Indian and respond accordingly. His language, metaphors, appearance, mannerisms, and habits, they define a persona that the world has come to recognize. I recall how fascinated American leaders were about his fasting habits during the 2014 visit, or the interest that Europeans showed in his yoga routine. A large element of this is also the manner in which the Prime Minister carries himself. Not just that, he is equally enthusiastic about sharing India's traditions and customs with his interlocutors. His own intuitive feel for diplomacy has also led him to find connects between foreign countries and their leaders with India. So these were some of the excerpts from the book which I thought I would share with you. I selected a spread because I didn't want to only give you a narrow foreign policy sense. I thought it would be good to also share with you what two other people, one of whom is my cabinet colleague, one of whom is a very close colleague in the senior levels of the government, what their perspectives were, because I'm sure had they been here today, something like this would have also come to their mind. So I hope very much that the book would be of interest. I could do a very different session with a very different set of authors. If I were to pick, let us say, from the authors, if I were to pick P.V. Sindhu, Sudha Murthy, and Sadhguru, I could give you a completely different talk. So since I can't give you that talk, I would urge you to read the book, enjoy it. It's very readably written. And I'm sure that for all of us, in different ways, it gives you a insight into the Prime Minister, into someone who clearly is destined to take this country to the next level. So once again, Vice Chancellor, I thank you very much for the opportunity. And perhaps I could take questions from there.
Thank you, sir, for sharing the significance of the book in terms of the writers range of writers that we have just mentioned. We also thank you for sharing the glimpses of the views of Sri Amit Shahaji and Sri Ajit Kumar Doval through their writings. And since, sir, you have worked with different leaders prior to 2014 as well as thereafter, you could share with us the difference in your experience and the difference in the policy initiatives taken up by Modi ji. Thank you for sharing those. And we also, I'm sure that many of us who are sitting here would say that we understand Modi ji more than we understood before your talk. And I'm very, very confident that if we read the whole book, we'll be able to understand him even more. Thank you so very much, sir, for your address. We'll have a discussion session hereafter. We have few students who also have given their names and would like to ask questions. Is Nisha Bhaskar there? Nisha Bhaskar is a law student pursuing second year of law, and she would like to ask a question to sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Um, I'm really honored, and I think we all are to hear, sir, this perspective. And all of us mentioned a lot about Mr. Modi, our Prime Minister, but one word that we forgot is pragmatic. Indeed, and the one policy that I think, or that is, of course, a very pragmatic policy, is the Sagar Mala policy. So, sir, my question is, how are we moving forward with the Sagar Mala project? And of course, it has been the plan and mind of the Honorable Prime Minister. So, how has he come up with this, and what would be its future projections?
I'd like to do take 3, 4 questions at a go.
Right.
I can deal with it.
Right. Thank you, sir. We have Professor Hanid Gandhi also with a question. Professor Hanid Gandhi is Dean Admissions of the university, and she is a professor in Department of Education. Yes,
Thank you.
madam.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, sir, for such an enlightening session. We have read your earlier book as well, but my question to you is little on the pandemic, COVID pandemic that we've seen. So we all know that the pandemic response to our nation among the COVID-19 outbreak was phenomenally successful among, in a population of 140 crore people. When the entire West was struggling with their own strategy, with our Prime Minister, we could take this outbreak in a very universalizing vaccination program. So my question to you is, what were the thought processes and the strategies which were made during this time, which made it possible to handle such a big outbreak? Thank you, sir.
We have Miss Amina Shirazi Nezad. Miss, yeah. She is a PhD scholar in Department of Buddhist Studies and she has come from Iran.
Hello, namaskar. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And I had a chance from the respected Dean of Academic Affairs to glance through a book quickly. And one of the significant points that I found in the one section of this book is that Modi's policy on empowering women, and that they has paid special attention to fundamental right of any woman, means right of dignity and free of fear of violence, specifically for Indian Muslim women, by criminalizing triple talaq and scrapping discriminatory provision against Muslim women in India. My question is that what does the other plans of the Honorable Modi's government to support Indian minority women, especially Muslim women? Thank you very much.
Right. One more. Mr. Tushar. Yes.
Good afternoon, sir. My question is regarding the illegal arrest of the fishermen in international waters or non-territorial waters. At India at 75, what steps are we taking to educate them and in tackling these issues which are continuously from last number of years going on in international domain?
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the questions. Thank you for actually showing the interest which you have. Let me, I didn't use the word pragmatic. There were a lot of words I didn't use because if I started describing Prime Minister, I wouldn't run short of words, I assure you. So, more than pragmatic, I would actually say he's a very grounded person. He's a very grounded person in the sense when he has a thought, when there is a policy, when there's a discussion, when there's an idea, his instincts are actually to see how does that get finally some kind of concrete shape. And one part of this book, by the way, is actually this interplay between the Gujarat period and the Delhi period. The Chief Minister Modi and the Prime Minister Modi. How do they keep sort of, in a sense, how have they influenced each other? And Sagarmala is a very good example because if you look at the changes which this country needs very badly, one of the very obvious changes is on the port side. But he's always had this view, it's not enough to build ports. We need port-led development. There's got to be the back-end infrastructure. There has to be a kind of a seamless movement from the production centers to the ports. And again, it is very natural in politics and governance to inherit something, use that as a base, and then the default position is to actually look for a incremental improvement. What has been different, I think, with the Prime Minister, with Prime Minister Modi, has been actually a willingness, very clear about, what is the baseline, and sometimes the baseline is better, sometimes it's not so good, but a willingness to really think big, do big, really look at ideas which are transformational in many ways. And definitely, if you look today, I think which you heard from Professor here, how to radically improve infrastructure, how to make us a serious manufacturing power, even how to make us a seriously exporting economy in terms of agriculture. Now, all of this will require a transformation, and obviously, Sagarmala is something which is very central to that. On the pandemic issue, it's interesting you asked me that question because very soon after, I'm talking of January, maybe mid-January, maybe early January of 2020. The moment reports started coming, what was happening in Wuhan, that this was likely to spread, the Prime Minister actually constituted a committee of ministers. I happen to be one of them. It was led by the health minister. I was there because there was a foreign angle to it. The minister dealing with pharmaceuticals, Mansukh Mandviya, was there. From the Home Ministry, and then Civil Aviation, Hardeep Puri was there. And as a group of ministers, we actually were meeting, the officials were doing a kind of a daily review, the ministers were doing a daily review, feeding into it, giving recommendations, analyzing, correcting, improving, it was sort of work as you made it up because it was a completely uncharted domain which we really had gone into. So a lot of the decisions which were made during that 2020-21 period, I think were a product of a very, there was a lot of thinking and strategizing and preparing within the system. There was a specialized medical side to it, a public health side to it. There was when we got into vaccine, for example, there was a pharmaceutical the production side to it. There was always the international side to it, including, because so many people, so many Indians were stuck abroad. But the point to me is not, I think there are two ways of doing this comparison. One is, how did we fare compared to other people? It's a fair question. It's not an easy answer. But sometimes we should also ask the question, how did we fare vis-a-vis ourselves in a way? Because I still remember the time when Covaxin first came. There were a lot of people who questioned Covaxin. It took the Prime Minister himself had that shot in public, as so did I on that day, because we wanted to put at rest this skepticism. And it was sad in a way that something even like a vaccine had actually got politicized in that atmosphere. But put Covaxin aside, people should appreciate there are still countries in the world where vaccines haven't reached. There are countries in the world where vaccines are there and they haven't been able to get it into the arm. So the fact that we were not, somewhere far back in the queue, waiting for our turn for vaccines to come from somewhere, the fact that we could make vaccines and that we could have a platform that each one of you at some point got on your phone a message saying, okay, this is your vaccination day, and that's your second shot day. Now, we take it as normal, okay? I mean, today we have internalized it. I mean, next time anything happens, all of us going to be looking at our phone messages. I want to tell you, when I go around the world and tell countries, even in Europe, that this is how it worked in India, I'm not sure they believe me. That they have not been able to actually, in fact, one of my early trips to the US, my youngest son was studying in a university. He actually showed me his, we went to New York somewhere. I had my vaccination certificate on a phone, okay, with the QR code. He pulled out from his wallet, parchi, which was folded in four, which the pharmacy had written saying, this is the vaccination that we take. So I am saying this for two reasons. It's important that as a country, as a society, especially I say this to young people, you must also know what you have achieved. That don't take your achievements as a given. That these are achievements where a lot of people's work has gone into it, a lot of effort has gone into it. In many ways, we are faring, I would say, very well against societies with much greater resources. So there is a lot, even in the, I'm not minimizing the problems we had, the difficulties we had. There's nobody in the room who would not have a really tough story to say themselves or for the near and dear. I accept all that. But the fact that we were able to come through a once in a century, and once in a century is not a metaphor, it's a literal phrase. A once in a century event, the fact that we have managed to come out of it, that in many ways that we have built capabilities and we've done it in a way in which it will serve us ahead, I think that is something which we should recognize. On the empowering women, no, absolutely. In fact, I would have quoted to you another chapter. There's a very interesting 2 paragraphs here. I think it's probably Amit Shah's chapter, where he's actually spoken about the response of women to Prime Minister Modi. The fact that today, you mentioned triple talaq, but look at Ujjwala, look at even Jan Dhan Yojana. I mean, when you looked at bank, the bank accounts which were opened were disproportionately of women. The money, the 400 million bank accounts to which money have gone for the last 28 months, so that under Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, are disproportionately women. If you look at education, you see the improved education rates. The whole focus on Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao. The fact that the Prime Minister actually from Red Fort has spoken about how people treat their sons and daughters differently. I would say to my mind, there's been a big gender awareness in this country, and it's, by the way, beginning to show up in our demographics as well. That is also, to my mind, a huge achievement. So I would actually count among the, I'm a foreign minister, so naturally I tend to speak more about foreign policy. But the social changes in this period, as a, not as a minister, but as a, as an individual, as a parent, as a grandparent, I mean, I think it is something which is quite remarkable. The last question on the fishermen. Look, this is a problem. It is a problem because there are different aspects to it. We get fishermen who are arrested sometimes in Sri Lanka. We have fishermen who are also detained sometimes in Pakistan. I even have some cases in Indonesia. So as a generic level, we need to actually assist the fishing community. I think they have not been given the kind of support historically which they should have. Today, there is actually a big move to equip them, with long liners for better fishing capabilities, equip them better in terms of GPS systems, and also perhaps in their fishing practices. Obviously, we work with our neighbors to minimize it, and we would, very much hope that over a period of time this comes down.
We can take some more questions, sir.
Don't come here that often.
Thank you, sir. Professor Geeta Bhatt is director of NCWEB. And she would like to pose a question.
Thank you so much, sir, for a very insightful address from you. Sir, definitely Prime Minister Modi has raised the bar of governance, of political ethics, and also including the aspirations and trust of the common people. Now, education is a thread which touches every Indian. And with the national education policy, the education in the country is looking forward to adding many more new dimensions in terms of academic curriculum standards and also in terms of curriculum flexibility. Now, one very unique aspect which the education policy talks about is encouraging the universities to not only invite students from foreign nations, but also to open their campuses in foreign countries. Sir, your thought on this, and how do you look at it in terms of what the universities need to do to pursue this, and also how opening of these campuses abroad are going to act as soft power for India? Thank you.
Next question from Professor L. Pushpakumar. L. Pushpakumar is a professor of law.
Thank you very much, Ratna. First of all, I'd like to thank for giving this wonderful opportunity to think about the nature and the work of the great man. Everyone has something or the other to learn from him. And the question is, under Sri Modiji's leadership, we have indeed proved our unique position in the world as a decisive country on many counts. At the same time, for us, South Asia is also important. As you have rich experience in working with foreign relations, I would like to ask your opinion on how do you think India has succeeded in consolidating its constructive role and leadership in SAARC region? And secondly, in your opinion, how do you think education institutions like Delhi University or South Asian University can play a role in facilitating this work? Thank you.
Ms. Tuti Wahal. Ms. Tuti Wahal is a PhD scholar.
Namaste, sir. My question to you is,
How has the public connect of our Honorable Prime Minister during his foreign visits has contributed towards the concept of Indianness in Indian diaspora? Thank you.
Mr. Rishabh Chaube. Mr. Rishabh is an LLB student.
Good morning, sir. Sir, my question is, as we know that much of our artifacts and treasure is still in the possession of foreigners like Kohinoor diamond in British. So, sir, what efforts our government is making to get them home? Thank you, sir.
Can we take one more question, sir? Professor Niranjan. He's Dean Planning of the university.
मेरा प्रश्न है कि संयुक्त राष्ट्र की जो आधिकारिक भाषाएं हैं उसमें हिंदी के बारे में बहुत चर्चा होती रही है और देश के एक बड़े तबके का मानना है कि हिंदी संयुक्त राष्ट्र की भाषा इसलिए भी होनी चाहिए कि भारत के स्वाभिमान का प्रतीक होगा. सो व्हाट इज द गवर्नमेंट डूइंग इन दिस रिगार्ड? थैंक यू वेरी मच.
The first two questions are partly connected, the campuses abroad and the students, because it applies to South Asia as well. The new education policy actually encourages universities to have more foreign students because in many ways, first of all, I personally believe that it's very good for our relationships with the world. We have an image in the world as an educational destination. People value, when they think of Indians, we are naturally associated with education, with talent, with skills. It's very much part of our branding, of our soft power. So I would say the more universities are able to take foreign students, I'm looking pointedly at the Vice Chancellor, I think you'll be strengthening our hands. So we would very definitely encourage you to do that. In terms of campuses abroad, look, our reputation of many of our universities and many of our, technical institutions, management institutions, medical institutions, they're very strong, strongly reputed. So there is a market out there. When I travel around the world, I often see, I've seen it in China, I've seen it in Singapore, I've seen it in UAE, where institutions of other countries have come and set up campuses there. At this moment, we are discussing it between the Education Ministry and us. The Education Minister, Dharmendra Pradhanji, is a very progressive, in a sense, very global person. It's something he has also been mulling over. We'll have to see, as you have heard in other contexts, how to get a good idea on the ground is the trick, how to do that. I know that, setting up a campus is a hugely complex proposition. There are many aspects to it. But I would hope very much that we enter an era where actually Indian institutions do go out of India and do set up campuses. I think they will do the country very proud. And I think our our universities in India will benefit from that. I think those interactions will enrich them as well. The question about South Asia, and all of this, by the way, applies to South Asia, to our immediate neighbors, perhaps more than even in other parts of the world. In a broader sense on South Asia, we are paying a lot of attention there. We are paying a lot of attention because, if you look at our region, everybody has borders. Very few countries have, everybody has a border with us. Almost everybody else, they may have a border with one more or not even one more. So we are in many ways not only the most biggest economy and polity, we are also the most connected in a way. We are, surely our economic weight is more. So I believe, and I know this is the Prime Minister's conviction very strongly, the initiative, the responsibility of actually creating a region in South Asia vests a lot with us. If we take the initiative, we push it, it will happen. If we don't, it won't happen. I mean, obviously, we need the others. I mean, that goes without saying. But even their expectations, they look up to us. I mean, they're waiting. They want India to make a move. They want India to put resources. So, in the last 8 years, what the Prime Minister has advocated as part of what we call neighborhood first policy. Neighborhood first is treat your neighborhood completely differently. You know, don't be reciprocal. Don't say they didn't do it, so I won't do this. You're the bigger guy. You should be the large-hearted guy. You should be the generous person. So go out there, find ways of responding to their needs. And today, because partly, that period when the British ruled us, the, the entire infrastructure was an extractive infrastructure. Anything which was not extractive was of no interest to them. Thereafter, the partition actually has done a huge damage to the region. So we have to overcome history today. So how do we, within South Asia, within the Indian subcontinent, how do we do the roads, the bridges, the tunnels, the waterways, even the energy links? And that is the transformation which is taking place. I would, in the last 8 years, for example, there's a power, we are both a power exporter and importer from Nepal. The same thing with Bangladesh. We are supplying fuel to a lot of our neighbors. You saw Sri Lanka is in difficulties right now. We have stepped forward to assist them. So this whole idea of India actually as a lifting tide, which is able to lift the entire neighborhood, and a lot of it is human. We would like to see students, we would like to see, medical tourists, we would like to see normal tourists between us. And we are among the least connected regions of the world. And we are all losing out because of that. And that's something Prime Minister is determined, absolutely determined to transform. And he ranks it very, very high in his priority. I think there was a question back there about how does the public connect help. The public connect is very interesting. For Indians who live abroad, they have today a very different feeling about their government and their country. I think the country they always loved, all of us do, it's very natural. But there was a certain cynicism about the government before, about the system, I would say, before. And I say this as someone who first went out, 40 years ago. Mostly, if you told people in any gathering you're from embassy, they would give you a series of complaints, this doesn't work, that didn't work, I went there, nobody looked at me, passport took so long. This was essentially what I heard for the first 20, 30 years of my life. Today, actually, that sense that, and this wasn't from my chapter, it was, I think, from Amit Shah's chapter, that Modi ji pe bharosa hai. System delivers. Students stuck in Ukraine says, I know I'm going through a problem, but I know you guys will come. Somebody, I may have a shipping crew somewhere. I may have workers in the Gulf. So that sense when you go out there and that communication which he does, it's not only the 5,000 to 10,000 people who are in the stadium. It's not only how it beams back to India. Every speech which he does, everything which is today on YouTube, what is on social media, it has a resonance to a larger world. And it has today, for me, the idea that Indians abroad believe us, trust us, and therefore by the way, at times when we ask them to do, because you often hear stories about how we went there and, we brought back people. But I can tell you, it would not be possible if they didn't help us. Even when Ukraine, Operation Ganga was going on, we had 5 borders, okay, and we are talking bitterly cold weather. In this period, actually, I had volunteers, Indian volunteers from the neighboring countries, and some of whom had actually traveled there from far away, who were willing to give days, if not weeks, helping out. Now, it wouldn't have happened in an earlier ethos where they did not feel that they were part of this connect. So this connect is huge. But there's another part to this connect. I sometimes watch the faces of foreign leaders who are also on the stage next to Prime Minister and looking at the energy between Prime Minister and that crowd. And there's that look on that face which kind of says, I wish it was me. Huh? Yeah. So, and by the way, some of them are honest enough to say that to us, saying, I've never seen anything like it. I think there is a chemistry out there. And that chemistry, to my mind, it's not an indulgence. It is actually a chemistry which, to my mind, helps our bonding abroad. It, it, it strengthens us as a nation in practical terms. It also is part of that image that we are today a society which looks after us, our own. The artifacts abroad, look, again, going back to the colonial period, there are very large, there are many things which are Indian, which are abroad, and a lot of them have no business being where they are. But again, it's part of Prime Minister Modi's emphasis that he's really pushed for the return of, especially of stolen artifacts. A very large number of them have come back. Some of them have been actually very notable pieces. And this is something I would say as part of correcting history, of recovering our place in the world. I think it's important that what was wrongfully taken away from this country must come back to it. एंड फाइनली आपका जो प्रश्न जो था वो हिंदी का जो है, देखिए हमारी भी आशा है, अपेक्षा भी है कि एक दिन संयुक्त राष्ट्र में हिंदी का उपयोग होगा। तो ये एक दिन में नहीं होता, इसकी काफ़ी तैयारी करनी पड़ती है। तो अलग अलग स्तर पे कभी कुछ मीटिंग्स में हम इंट्रोड्यूस कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि पूरे असेंबली में जो करना जो है उसके लिए एक पूरी व्यवस्था खड़ी करनी होती है और उसमें समय लगता है, सबको मानना भी होता है, उसमें बहुत रिसोर्सेज भी लगते हैं। पर हम उस दिशा में जा रहे हैं और हमने कुछ शुरू भी किया है। कुछ यूएन के पब्लिकेशंस भी हैं जहां हिंदी का उपयोग होता है। तो देखते हैं, एक दिन हमारी चाह तो होगी जरूर कि हिंदी का उपयोग।
Can we take some more questions or? I have some names done. Okay. Professor Brajesh Chaudhary is Professor of Physics and he heads the department currently.
Thank you, Dr. Jaishankar, for your excellent exposition of Modi at 20. My question is not on this book, but in the context of your book, The Indian Way, Strategies for an Uncertain World, which I'm still reading. And the chapter that I am in is the dogmas of the Delhi. So I finished the Krishna choice, and I have read Srimad Bhagavad Gita several times in Hindi and partly in Sanskrit. So I'm going to ask you a question regarding two present decisions that the government of India has taken and which you represent for us in the context of Krishna's choice that you have mentioned there. One is the Ukraine war. We have taken a position there, and we have heard you on YouTube, on television. So the question is, if the Ukraine war prolongs, will the Krishna choice change, get modified, or how it will happen? Because it seems that the war is going to prolong, at least that's my understanding. You can definitely say better on that. The second question is that in the recent past, on the statement of a political leader, we had to cut a bit sorry in the international affairs. I'm not going to go into detail. I'm very sure you understand it. Do you think the Krishna choice in these two, the Ukraine, where we have seen your exposition in a very different way in Europe, is different than what we have done here? And are these both the Krishna choice, or we did make certain compromises? I will like your view on that. Thank you.
Just one.
Okay, clearly you said the toughest one for the end. But look, I think in the case of what is happening in Ukraine, uh, okay, even in, I mean, for those of you who may not have read my book, essentially what in one of the chapters of my book, I have tried to take the various scenarios, situations of the Mahabharata and try to relate it to diplomatic happenings and situations as they happen in contemporary times. So that's the analogy which the professor is talking about. Now, the central message which I give there is actually life is very complex. That very often what is right, what is wrong, what is in your interest, what is not, where should you be restrained, where should you not, when is the time to act, when is the time to be silent. These are not very clear black and white choices. That in if you actually follow Sri Krishna's journey through the Mahabharata in a way, whether it's as a diplomat, whether it is as an advisor, there are you know positions he has taken and courses of action he has advocated during that period. My sense is, from that perspective, what we are doing in the case of Ukraine, I believe, is the right course for this reason. Number one, uh, it is a very complex issue, and the real issue, to my mind, the most urgent issue is uh, to prevent hostilities from escalating to a, to a level where it only does harm. In that sense, actually, there is a Krishna's choice. I mean, Krishna does do everything in his power to actually prevent the war. You know, so he is actually the emissary who says, "Look, find some way of working it out. Return to dialogue and diplomacy," which is our Ukraine position. On the uh, on the complexity and what is happening, I also think that there are other aspects of Krishna's choice there, because we have interests at stake. We have historical interests, we have strategic interests, we have current interests, and we have to manage those interests. I mean, even in Mahabharata, a lot of it is your beliefs and principles and your interests. How do you harmonize? How do you harmonize that? And I think that is a challenge that we face here as well. There is also a larger issue today, increasingly flowing out of the Ukraine conflict. It is an issue about fuel shortage. It is an issue about food shortage. It is an issue of fertilizer shortage, which will become food shortage in the coming years. So when the global praja, in a way, is very deeply impacted by what is happening in a conflict, I think there the more sagacious voices, the more sober voices need to speak. At the same time, as a someone responsible for the welfare of my own people, I have to do what I have to do to ensure their best interests, and I think that, in a sense, is what I'm doing. Regarding your other observation, look, to my mind, um, I didn't have time to dilate on it. I refer to it in my book. Prime Minister Modi has spent a lot of attention on changing I would say, our image, our engagement, our actually our relationship with countries in the Gulf. And in fact, only recently he was in UAE as well as in that regard. Now, because he is visible, because he has been active on the international stage, a lot of world leaders know him. Okay. They know him, they know us, they know this government, they know what are our views. So I think when we asserted that, what was said did not reflect the views of the party in that case, and because many of them took it up with ambassadors, obviously the ambassadors also pointed that out. I think they accepted that. If you see a lot of the response of a lot of countries, a lot of countries took the view saying that, look, we regret what was said. We have also noted what in this case, the party concerned, the BJP, has clarified. So I think here the our very activity, our energy, our prior understanding of what India is and what is the dispensation in India, I think was helpful in that regard.
Thank you, sir, for patiently answering all the questions that has been posed. May I now request our registrar, Dr. Vikas Gupta ji, to kindly propose a vote of thanks.
Thank you so much. Most respected chief guest of today's function, Shri S. Jaishankar ji, Honorable External Affairs Minister, Government of India, Professor Yogesh Singh, Honorable Vice Chancellor, University of Delhi, Eminent Speaker, Senior Professor Dr. Pami Dua, Director, Delhi School of Economics, dignitaries on the dais, distinguished invitees, colleagues, my dear students, and friends from media. Namaskar. It is an honor and privilege for me to stand here before this august gathering to propose the vote of thanks on behalf of University of Delhi and my own behalf. I would like to convey my profound regards to Dr. S. Jaishankar, Honorable External Affairs Minister,